You know, there are a few names in history that just conjure up this immediate sense of horror. And Adolf Hitler is, without a doubt, at the top of that list. I mean, this is a man who rallied an entire nation, threw the world into its deadliest war, and orchestrated atrocities that are still hard to comprehend. But here's the thing. To really understand how he got all that destructive power, we have to rewind. We have to go back to a time when he was a nobody, a complete unknown, a man from nowhere. Okay, so let's just sit with this for a second. This quote, it just perfectly captures the almost magnetic, hypnotic hold he eventually had on people. Picture it, crowds of thousands, all united, all there because of one man's will, ready to follow him into absolute madness. But this kind of influence, it wasn't a given. It wasn't inevitable. It was built very carefully, piece by piece, from the rubble of a completely failed life.
And that, right there, is the huge question we're tackling in this explainer. I mean, you look at this picture of him as a kid. It just seems impossible, right? A young boy from a pretty quiet childhood in rural Austria who would one day be responsible for so much horror. How on earth does that transformation even happen? To really get a sense of the stakes, we have to start with the consequences. The Second World War, a conflict he personally engineered, led to the deaths of over 60 million people. Let that number sink in. The entire world was fundamentally changed by what this one man did. So understanding the path that led to this is, well, it's absolutely crucial.
So the first chapter of his transformation doesn't start on a battlefield or in a political hall. Nope, it starts in an art school. It's a story that's really all about personal failure, a deep-seated bitterness, and most importantly, the search for someone, anyone, to blame for a life that had just gone completely off the rails.
So picture this. It's 1907. Hitler is 18 years old, and he shows up in Vienna, which at the time was like the cultural capital of Europe. He's got his portfolio under his arm and this absolutely unshakable belief that he's a genius. He was completely convinced that getting into the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts was just a formality. But then the verdict comes back, and it's a crushing blow. The professors, they thought his work was okay, but totally unoriginal. He failed. Now, for Hitler, this wasn't a time to maybe think, hey, maybe I should practice more. In his mind, it wasn't his talent that failed. It was the jury. It was a betrayal. And that planted this seed of really profound anger. And that one failure, it just sent him into a total downward spiral. You can see how fast it happened on this timeline. He tries again the next year, fails again. His savings run out. And by 1909, the guy who wanted to be a great artist is homeless, sleeping on park benches, living in shelters, a complete and total outcast. So, drowning in all this bitterness, Hitler starts reading everything he can get his hands on, especially Vienna's radical anti-Semitic newspapers. And this kind of rhetoric, well, it gave him the perfect scapegoat. It told him that society's problems were all because of this harmful foreign body, the Jews. Now, for a guy who was already convinced his own failures couldn't possibly be his own fault, this was the exact simple answer he was looking for. So his personal rage now had a target, but it was a massive world-changing event that gave him a real stage to act on. World War I gave this homeless drifter a purpose, a home, and eventually a way into the political world where he could really start to weaponize all that hatred he'd been storing up. And the transformation was, well, it was staggering. The war was like a revelation for him. Think about the switch here. As an outsider in Vienna, he was a nobody. But in the German army, he finally found a family. The failed artist became a decorated soldier, even earning the Iron Cross, an award he wore for the rest of his life. For the very first time, he felt like he belonged. He had a purpose. After the war, all of that loyalty and intense patriotism gets him noticed by a guy named Captain Karl Mayr. Mayr was worried about communism spreading, so he recruits Hitler to be an informant, basically a spy, to keep tabs on all the radical political groups popping up in post-war Munich. And it's on one of these spy missions that Hitler discovers his one true talent. While he's working for the army, he starts putting his ideology down on paper. In one of his first political writings, he uses this German word, Entfernung. It literally translates to removal. He wrote that the ultimate goal had to be the irrevocable removal of the Jews.
You see? This wasn't just some vague prejudice anymore. This was the beginning of a political program, a program aimed at the violent expulsion of an entire group of people from society.
And this leads us to the third stage of his rise. And this is where that failed artist inside him comes back, but in a totally twisted way. He didn't just join a political party, he rebranded it, using what were then pioneering techniques of political marketing to sell an ideology of pure hate.
Just take the party flag, for example. This was no accident. It was a calculated piece of branding. Step 1, he stole the color red from his communist rivals to appeal to workers. Step 2, he took the white and black from the old German Empire's flag to appeal to nationalists. And then, right in the center, he slapped the swastika, an ancient symbol he twisted to represent his crazy theories of racial superiority.
He even rebranded himself. He got rid of the old-fashioned, bushy mustache of some anonymous soldier and adopted that modern, distinctive brush cut. He even worked with his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, practicing these dramatic poses and gestures, carefully crafting an instantly recognizable public image. He wasn't just a politician. He was an actor playing a very specific role.
And this brand wasn't just about looks. It was built with some really powerful and, frankly, brutal tools. He created his own personal militia, the SA, or brown shirts, to project strength and beat up opponents. His rallies weren't just speeches. They were huge theatrical displays of power. And he understood something very modern. Violence was a form of publicity. Orchestrated brawls guaranteed that the Nazis, and his name, would be all over the newspapers. But this brand, built on intimidation and street fights, it had its limits. The final and most crucial phase of his rise came after a huge failure, a failure that forced him to pivot his strategy completely and figure out how to conquer the system from the inside. So in 1923, Hitler tries to just take power by force in what's known as the Beer Hall Putsch. It was a total disaster, and he got thrown in prison. Now, this could have been the end of his story, but for Hitler, it was a lesson. He realized he couldn't destroy the German Republic with brute force. So what's the new strategy? Go legal. He decided he would use the very tools of democracy to dismantle it. And in prison, he literally writes the book on his plans. It's called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And what's so wild is that this book was an open blueprint for everything he was going to do. It laid out his entire racist ideology, his hatred for Jewish people, and his ambition for a future war to conquer vital space for Germany. All the horror that was to come, he spelled it out, right there, for anyone to read.
So when he gets out of prison, he needs money to make this new legal strategy work. And he got it from some of Germany's most powerful industrialists, like a guy named Fritz Thyssen. Thyssen was tempted by Hitler's promises of huge rearmament contracts, so he funneled over 250,000 marks into the Nazi Party. That money was critical. It paid for their headquarters and fueled their massive propaganda campaigns. And that money, combined with the absolute economic desperation of the Great Depression, had a dramatic effect. Just look at this surge. In 1928, the Nazi Party was a tiny fringe group, getting just 3% of the vote. But by 1932, by exploiting all that national despair and being fueled by industrial cash, they had become the largest party in Germany, with 33% of the vote. And that surge in votes led directly to this moment. On January 30th, 1933, the old guard political establishment, thinking they could control him, appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. In just a little over a decade, the failed artist, the homeless vagrant, the man from nowhere, had finished his journey. He was now at the absolute center of power. You know, the story of Hitler's rise is just this chilling study in how personal resentment, when you mix it with political opportunity, economic crisis, and the modern tools of marketing, how it can be forged into a weapon of immense and terrifying power. And it leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about. What happens when political rage gets turned into a brand?